Hi guys. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. I got a mic. I feel like Gen Z. Do I look Gen Z? Don't tell me. Don't actually tell me. Don't look at my wrinkles. Well, hi. Welcome back. I know I already said that, but it's great to have you here. Today, I'm going to it's going to be a long one, so I'm going to try to keep this intro short. We are going to have a little tutorial moment for you. I'm going to teach you how I painted my carrots in my newest farmers market series that I am very close to finishing. I still have leaves and things to paint on the actual painting, but what we're going to focus on is how I painted the actual carrots. It was so much fun. Honestly, this has been one of my favorite paintings I've done in a minute. I really had a very special bond with my most recent tutorial or most recent video that I did, the wisteria painting. And actually, once I finished that painting, there was no inspiration in my in my heart left. I went through a few weeks of just kind of not knowing what I wanted to do next. The summer in Southern California, it brings farmers markets. And me and my husband have been going whenever we stumble upon one, or if there's an awesome one up the street from us every Thursday. And I have just become invigorated. I'm ready. I want to paint produce so much. I have so many photo references right now, and I decided to start with carrots. They're beautiful. It was, I had to mix a lot of fun colors and I got to play around with textures, and they're imperfect, but in a perfect way. And I'm really excited to share my process with you. Things that you'll need your watercolor paper. You'll need a watercolor set. I will link all of the materials that I use below, so just keep an eye out for that. So you need your watercolor set, fresh water, paper towels, and then your favorite paintbrushes. I use pretty small ones. I think I'll go from 550 up to maybe a size 4. That's as big as I go on this painting. If you want to paint along with me, I would love that. Something that might interest you is I just posted a video of my actual drawing process and how I use a grid method to perfect my initial sketches. And I showed that with the carrot painting that we're going to do today. And I'll link it below, as well as the reference photo. That'll be in this video and the previous video. So just be on the lookout for that. I know I said I'd keep it short and sweet, and I didn't. So I don't think there's much more to say, so let's get going. I do apologize for some of these angles. I am currently filming for YouTube and Instagram. I don't really have a different setup as for now, so please bear with me. You'll notice that I am wetting the entire area of this carrot to drop in the colors that I already have pre-mixed in my pans. I think creating your mixes before you get started is crucial to the painting process. It allows you to be more intuitive with your experience and drop in the colors that you're seeing in your reference photo. With watercolors, you are always working from light to dark. It's not like oils or acrylics where you can add your highlights easily at the end. Yes, you can scrub away color, but it doesn't always work to the maybe degree that you want. So keep in mind you're just building up from your lightest layer to your darkest layer. And watercolors always dry down much lighter than what you initially see. While my carrot is still damp and the paint is still movable, I am taking my dried off brush, you can see I'm drying it on the paper towel there, to remove and just define the highlight so I can add in more layers of depth around it, but I really want to keep that highlight as light as possible in this layer. So now I'm going in and combining 2 different oranges together to start building up while the carrot is very lightly damp. We don't want it soaking wet at this point, but we do want our layers to slightly blend together. So you'll see I'm just placing it down on the edges, and I will just take what's left after I place it down and blend the colors back and forth with sweeping motions similar to the actual shape of the carrot. So you'll see I kind of round my brush out to mimic the curves inside of a carrot. And then I will just continue to pick up my little mixes of oranges and browns and place them on those edges for my first building layer. I usually like to paint in maybe 3, 4, potentially 5 layers to really get the vibrancy that I like in my paintings. You'll notice that I keep dipping into my water and lightly tapping my brush off on the paper towel, and that just keeps a little bit of paint on my brush, but then allows me to just mix and blend without having the amount of water overpower and disrupt the layers below. It's important to have your reference photo directly in front of you to really know what colors need to be placed down. You can see I go in with some straight up orange, I go in with more yellow orange, or even just yellow ochre, and that's purely based off of a reference photo. I'm just trying to replicate exactly what I see in the photo. I'm not really making anything up. Now that my base layer is dry, I'm building up the next layer to create the three-dimensionality of my piece. So what I like to do is I place down my blocks of color, and then I will clean off my brush lightly, dab it on paper towel, and start blurring it into the base layer, following the actual shape of the carrot to build up the three-dimensional figure. You'll see I'm just whipping back and forth and back and forth, and I'm working in small sections to ensure that that paint doesn't dry fully. I want it to still be workable. I'm taking a little bit more saturated amounts of that orange, and while that area that I just worked on is still damp, I'm just building that up more to punch up that color a little bit. And you'll see, like in a real carrot, I'm not really worrying about the smoothness of my brush strokes here. I actually really want those curves and those little lines to show, similar to like the divots and the natural grooves that you see in carrots. If I notice that my color is a little bit too dark like it just was, I'll just quickly dab off my brush on the paper towel and pick up that pigment as it's settling. The best thing about carrots, honestly, is that they are just rough and imperfect. So you can make these little grooves and these little bumps and messes, and it actually adds to the overall piece. If it was just a smooth carrot, it's basically like I already took a peeler to it, but I want it to still look like it was just taken from farm to counter, really. On to the next layer. I'm just basically copy and pasting. I'm repeating exactly what we did, completely avoiding that center area so I can really keep that highlight popping. So I'm just focusing on building up the edges to be darker. You can see I even mixed a little bit more of that yellow ochre here. Even though I am painting an orange carrot, I wanted to bring in the glow from its neighbor almost. So since the carrot next to it is yellow, it will have a little bit of reflection naturally. And again, that's just looking at the reference photo. Continuing to build up those lines and then smudging them out with a clean, damp brush. And still, while it's damp, I'm adding in another little layers and little drops of color and smudging and blurring. And I take a paper towel at moments if I feel like, whoa, that got a little bit out of hand. Let's just kind of reset. So when it's wet, even if I loved exactly how it was looking texturally, sometimes I'll just dab it off. So I almost always have a paper towel in my left hand just ready to pick up what I need. Always following the natural curves of the shape of the carrot. I'm painting this carrot in sections so you can see top half versus the bottom half, and this just makes sure that I know how my paints are going to act. So they're not going to ever dry down without my knowledge, and they're never going to be too wet where I don't have control and they're kind of taking over my painting. You can see I just added a small concentrated line of paint right down the right hand side of that carrot, and I'm taking my clean damp brush and just smudging it back and forth in those curved lines. And now I'm doing the same thing on the left side. Here you can just see my technique is I'm just kind of scribbling my paintbrush back and forth in that area to blend it into that lower layer. So it is making texture without a lot of energy really, and it makes the painting come to life. I'm adding, based on my reference photo, a little bit of yellow concentrated at the bottom, and that will just make it look even more realistic, which is always what I'm aiming to do. Creating those curves and those divots all the way up the sides of the carrot, just following the natural shape that it has. If I were to make these lines straight across, there would be no dimension to this carrot. Since our layers do dry down and lighten a lot as they dry, I'm now re-emphasizing details that I feel like have gone missing in that process, like that little pocket of paint right there, and I'm just placing in the concentrated color and cleaning off my brush and moving it around to smooth out those edges and blend them into the below layers like I did with the previous ones. If I were to have my brush be too wet at that stage, that would really mess up what I worked down underneath. We want the amount of dampness on the brush to be very minimal, enough to have workability and that you know that there is still paint and some like water in the brush, but not enough where it feels like it's sopping wet. Based on the reference photo, you'll see I added some brown up to the top, which really grounds out the color of the carrot that will eventually lead into our stems. And I'm sure it's starting to feel very repetitive at this point how much I'm saying based on the reference photo, but it really is the only thing that we're making these judgment calls based off of. You'll see I'm again placing down a very concentrated amount of this orange paint, which I will then go and diffuse with a clean brush. By using the concentrated paint and then a clean brush to diffuse it, you really have a lot more control of what the end result is going to look like, rather than trying to lighten up the paint in the pan with more water, which will just start getting messy and not allow you to achieve the level of realism. You're really controlling the amount of paint that you want on the paper. You're not doing it in the pan. And we're just repeating these steps over and over, layer by layer. I think we're up to layer 4? I don't know, you tell me, but you'll see it's slowly coming to life and we're not rushing it at all. We're just doing it in little segments. A little paint, a little smudge, and a little dab. A little dab will do ya. Using that paper towel, it also kind of leaves what I like to call like the ghost of my paint. So it will leave kind of what you painted underneath as like a whisper of what it was. So it's actually like a helpful technique as well to control what you want there. If you want something super subtle but not have to add too much water so it doesn't mess up what's going on, the paper towel almost works as the water. And I'm just adding lots of little lines and little imperfections to build up more texture and more realism. You can see going in here with a smaller brush and concentrated orange and just doing little dashes, little tick marks. and just leaving them exactly where I want them to be. There is not a lot of water going on right now. And see, there was my ghost. There was the ghost of the paint again. And again, ghost. Here, I'm not taking any paint on my brush. I'm just using the dampness of my brush and smudging out an area because I felt like I was losing that highlight. So I'm smudging out the color, and then I used my paper towel to damp it away. And just reinstating now a little bit darker, strictly on the edge for the curved shadows. I'm doing that over and over on the edges. And little dots and little bumps, just like a real carrot. Now I'm just building up the finer details, so I'm being very meticulous of where I'm placing everything. It's a lot more of the concentrated paint that I'm focusing in very specific areas. I'm not really blending and buffing quite as much right now. This is more like the deeper tones that I want to build up in very specific areas to keep the details moving. See, I didn't like that there wasn't enough highlight there, so I'm smudging out with a clean brush, buffing it away as much as I can, and picking it up with my paper towel to reinstate that highlight. And just doing that in a blended motion. And this doesn't always work with every single color of watercolor. Unfortunately, like some don't pick up quite as much as other colors, and that's just something that you have to play around with and learn. Sometimes your colors, like red, will pick up so easily that it's almost a mistake. And some colors, like this orange, will just slightly move and slightly buff away. So it's just trial and error. I think these curves make such a difference, these little divots. They really emphasize that this is just a carrot pulled straight out of the ground. There's nothing perfect about it. And they're my favorite little bits to add. Getting to the detail stage is really where I start loving a painting. You might notice that I'm readjusting the brush in my hand quite a few times before I actually place any paint down. And it's just me making sure that I know exactly where I want that paint to go, because once you put paint to paper with watercolor, it's staying. It's not like oils where you can hide it or readjust or add a layer on top. So I'm just making sure the paint is comfortable, and it's definitely like a mindless habit. I don't really realize that I'm doing it, but you just want to make sure you're confident in your placement and commit. And if all else fails, scrub and make it a ghost. This bend in the carrot makes there a natural shadow there in the reference photo, so I'm just building up a little bit more of that shadow there with the concentrated paint, and then blending it and buffing it out. And just building up those little curves and details. All right, moving on. So I'm taking a clean glass of water and completely covering the surface of my next carrot. and just not making it swampy. I just want it to be an even layer of water. Nothing too crazy. We don't need the water to really move around with our paints. I just want it to be able to flow so I have an even base layer. This is another orange carrot, so I'm picking up a mix of a more reddish orange and straight up orange and just lightly placing it in. It's a watered down mix, so it's not going to be very vibrant, and remember, it's going to dry a lot lighter. You can see it's not flowing by itself. It's also on a flat surface, so it's not going to flow, but I'm just guiding and coaxing the paint all the way through the entire area of that carrot. Now I'll switch to a smaller brush here for the next layer. So while that carrot is still damp, I'm just picking up that same mix and I'm going to place my mixture of a little bit more concentrated of a color straight onto those corners. And I'm just testing my color on a swatch sheet that's right in front of me. I always keep a swatch sheet very close. You'll see it in some other clips, but I just want to make sure that the tones are correct. And I'm just adding those to the edges. And I'm just doing this very lightly and in smaller sections. And you'll see I almost continuously tap onto the paper towel, almost like right after I pick up the first amount of paint, because I don't want it to be that dark right now. I really want to have the control of the paint. And sometimes I don't even dip back into the water. There I did. But sometimes I'll just go pan or mix to mix and let them naturally combine. I'm not really worried about exact mixes right now. So again, looking at your reference photo, it's important to just really notice and figure out where the highlight is in your photo. So I'm really focusing a lot of this depth on the left hand side because the highlight is going to be a lot more prominent on the right. I'll eventually go and add more to that side when it's necessary, but for now I know that my darkest edge is going to be the left side because that is the most in shadow. So we're just repeating the steps that we did before. Technically, this is our layer 1. So we did the wash of color overall, the entire carrot, and while still damp, adding in those darker tones. You can see there I took a clean brush and I'm removing, but technically this is all layer 1. So we're working wet on wet currently. I don't love wet on wet. I really only do it in these base layers. My favorite is definitely wet on dry and using my brush to blur everything together. If it's not obvious, I want to be in control of what's happening on my paper. And I think watercolor is amazing because you can have so many styles where the watercolor and the paint is really the thing in control. But for me, I want to be in control. Differently in this carrot, I'm not really placing down currently a big swatch of color and then blending it out. I'm more so stippling in my color to build up into my next layer. So my paint underneath the first layer, it has completely dried, and now I'm just starting to add into the second layer and making those details. For me, I also like picking up very little amounts of paint. So I'll kind of live on the edges of my pre-mixes, and sometimes those even dry down, which I actually really love, and having them be just more concentrated pigment. So you'll see I'm kind of just picking up from like the edges, really. I'm not going straight into the most intense level of water. Since this is very similar to the first carrot that I just taught you how to do, I won't really be giving a lot of insight unless I notice that I'm doing something very different. So just keep in mind, if you are painting along or using this as an actual tutorial, I'm putting heavier amounts of paint on the edges of the carrots and leaving the center light and free for the highlight, and I'm just building it up that way. So paint, clean brush, smudge, and don't forget the ghost. Here's where you'll notice that I'm actually picking up that really dry mix from my pan. So it basically created a new color and then just let it dry. I wasn't really using it, but I let it dry, and it's almost like it's a new pan of paint that I'm reactivating when necessary. And that color is a mix of browns, I believe Van Dyke brown, and my orange. Because although carrots are orange, or the one that I'm currently painting is, there's a lot of brown and more neutral tones, and I feel that brown is an amazing addition to a lot of colors. I actually add brown into most of my greens when I'm making leaves. I add it into, I add it into almost everything because I think it adds a layer of like neutrality to it that makes it more believable and more realistic. If I was going in with just straight up orange, which at times can be awesome, but if I was doing that for the entire piece, it would look almost cartoony. So we just want it to have some muddier tones, and a little bit of brown can go a long way. You can see now I'm starting, I believe, layer 3, and it's such a buildup. It's such a slow process to really get it to a level of vibrancy that is, or saturation that is really desired in my final painting. So it's a slow build, it's a slog, but we love it, and we're just making that happen with subtle details and tone shifts, and the divots and the curves really bring it together. So we're kind of starting that there, and just will continue as we go. So back and forth. I'm continually changing the way that I'm placing down my paint, so either little stipples, little dashes, little smudges here and there, and that will really make those textural elements come to life. Here's where I'm building up with that concentrated area of paint, and then I'll go in and smudge that out to just blend it into the base layers. You'll see I'm keeping the movement of my brush really small and really defined to an area. I'm not taking big brush strokes at all. I'm really just making sure that I'm moving it exactly where I want it to go with a very quick little hand rather than big sweeping brushstrokes. Guys, I completely lied to you. It's not Van Dyke Brown, it's Sepia Brown. That's the brown that I love mixing in. It's also the brown I have in my kit. I like it because, at least in the Schmincke set, it's a cool toned brown rather than more of a warm tone. So really what we're going for is just a cooler toned brown. We don't want to add any more warmth because orange is obviously very warm already. So we're kind of combating that with the cool tone of this brown. If I'm starting a divot on one side of the carrot, I kind of will highlight another divot on the other side because then it looks like there's a little bit of a three-dimensional moment in between them. I don't think I start them on the same side unless that's what I see in the reference photo, like if there are two. But for the most part, I'll have them start on opposite sides and bleed in towards each other. So then there's more emphasis on like the curve side by side. And you don't want anything uniform. It's all about the organic shapes. So we can use some dry brush stippling techniques. We can just make sure that all like the divots and lines are just kind of placed a little haphazardly with some emphasis. Like we definitely are thinking about where they're going because of the reference photo. Hey guys, take a shot every time I say reference photo, my goodness. But we aren't wanting it to look uniformed by any means. Oh boy, here we go. We're moving on to the big yellow carrot in the back. We're starting every carrot the exact same way. A wash of clean water over the entire surface with clean water. And then we're going to take our premix of the yellow and just place it in, guide it in, and have it be a nice even layer for our first wash. And I'm using my number 4 for the base washes of these carrots, and then I'll go in once I cover the entire surface like I did with the other ones and add in the more concentrated amounts of color to create the shadows. And I'll do my best to list the actual color mixes that I created in the description box below. But I'm pretty sure for this one, for the yellow, I just used my Indian yellow, some Quinacridone Gold Hue, definitely some Cad Yellow Light in there, and yellow ochre. I like the natural tone that yellow ochre creates. So that's on my left hand right there, that palette that I'm using. In the more middle one, that's a little deeper of a yellow, I would have added probably some burnt sienna or a heavier amount of yellow ochre. But I'll list those below. And here, looking at the reference photo, I'm following and creating the natural shadows that are from the carrot the yellow carrot that's on top of this one. And since it's living behind the bunch of other carrots and stems and things, we just want to be really mindful about where we're placing everything to make sure that it looks realistic. So I'm just really keeping my eyes moving and looking back and forth from the photo and what I'm creating, and making sure my paper stays nice and damp so I have the control, but you can see that I'm just building that up very slowly and very subtly while keeping the highlight where I want it to be in the middle again. Realism paintings are really all about like the subtleties and nuances of things. So you'll notice I added like that little bit of like a bump down on the bottom right hand side of that carrot, which is very much present in the reference photo. And while it's not like visually appealing, really, it's not like pretty or interesting, it's there and it's necessary. So you're just really focusing on the things that actually make the painting real. You're not painting what you want it to look like, you're painting what you're seeing. For all these details, I did switch back to my smaller brush. The number 4, like I said, was only for the first wash, so the smaller brush just allows me to have more control. Now I'm picking up some of that brown and mixing that in with that yellow ochre to make the shadows underneath what is going to be the purple carrot. So like I said, with the orange one where I had the reflection of the yellow carrot that added into some of my shadows, that's similar with this yellow carrot. There's a bit of like it's a bit more dull of a shadow than it is of just like a pure yellow shadow. The reflection of that purple carrot will eventually come into play, and you just want to pick up on those color shifts. And it's still slightly damp, so I'm just bringing that color up a little bit more. I didn't wait for the paper to fully dry. If it was fully dry, it wouldn't have been a problem. I'll still blend it out afterwards, but that's the level that it's at right now. The shadows of this carrot actually add and make the layering process a lot quicker to get it to this level of detail, because so much of it does live in shadow. So it's a lot more concentrated pigment in that paint that I'm putting down just first go than I was in the other carrots. And I'm still picking up, you can see there I took the clean brush to pick up for those highlights because I still really want to make sure I don't lose those. But I want this carrot to be pretty vibrant because the farther back it is and under the shadow, it will be just darker. So that technically I think was like first 2 layers, I'd say. It wasn't really exactly layers 1 and 2. They kind of blended into each other. I worked on this carrot pretty quickly. Now this would be technically the 3rd layer where I'm again going in and building up those shadows a lot stronger, and then going to blend them out into the other parts of the carrot. I'm smudging in a dirty yellow color in under this eventual stem. And right now it might look intense, but it really adds to the realism. It is that dark, and you'll see as I build up the surrounding shadows, it becomes a lot more cohesive. And if I didn't have the other carrots built up to a level of realism that I was pretty content with, it would look really like out of place and kind of intimidating. But that's why I don't start with the darkest carrot first. So on the left-hand side, I placed down a pretty cool toned shadow, and on the right-hand side, I placed down a more orange warm shadow. To combine these two together, I pick up my mix of yellow that the overall carrot is, and I blend it in between the two to create a seamless transition. To build up this shadow, you can see I'm using like side-swiping stippling motions, which is reflective of the overall like shape of the carrot and those little divots that I'll eventually create. And then I just cleaned off my brush, and now I'm just blurring and smudging that in, so then the shadows aren't perfect. And you'll see the more that I add detail and depth to the shadow here, which is created by the carrot on top, it really starts making the piece come even more to life. The carrot does now look like it's receding into the background, and that the carrot on top is lighter and getting more of the direct sunlight. We don't want those two carrots. They are not in the same value range. The carrot that is in the background will be much darker because it's not receiving as much sunlight. So we don't want those to be equal in their value. So I'm taking my mix of yellow and doing a bit of a wash over the top. A wash is just like a glazing of colors. So it's not saturated or deep in any way. It just adds like a little bit more of a top coat to the painting. So watered down mix. And now I'm starting to add in my little grooves and my little details while still maintaining that central highlight. So there I'm just using like the flat side of my thumb and of my palm to test the dampness of the paper. I don't like to go in with like my finger straight up because you can't really feel it quite as much as I feel like you can on the palm of your hand. And that way I just know how wet my paper is and if I'm ready to go in with my next layer of wet on dry. See, again, I'm focusing on that shadow. I think it's a very crucial detail on this carrot. So I'm going in with a little bit more concentrated of the brown and yellow ochre, so sepia brown and yellow ochre, to really punch this up. I want it to be dark. I want it to be substantial because it is the way that we will emphasize that this is a three-dimensional object. And I'm just blending out that edge with what looks like a damp brush with a little bit of color on it, but that's just adding to the next layer that we're going to add on top of that carrot. So I'm just taking sweeping motions back and forth with a slight curve to it to just bring that color all the way down the body of that carrot. And blending in more of that yellow ochre to the top to again bring its value a little bit darker so it's not as bright as the carrot in the foreground. These carrots really come together by the shadows, really. There isn't a lot going on the carrots. It's unlike a flower, which I usually paint, which has a lot of petals and a lot of details that really come together to create a realistic shape. Carrots really rely on the curves and making sure the shadows look realistic. So that's just slow layers, building them up, and then adding in those imperfections, which I'm starting here in a little bit more of a brown shade. So when I was working on the orange carrots, those were done with more concentrated orange paints, and on the yellow carrots, they're living in the brown family. So I'll be tinting my yellows and my browns with each other. So if I have more of a brown mixture, it'll have yellow to make sure it's harmonious, and vice versa. If I'm going in with a more yellow shade, it'll have brown in there to also be harmonious. And here it is with those little dots and those little squiggles and scratches that make it look like it's pulled straight from the earth. Looking at, you guessed it, the reference photo for where these will be placed. And because we really nailed all of those base layers to create a harmonious shape, this is where we really get to have fun in creating more textural elements that really just make the piece come together and feel more like a photo than just a painting. Not that this is photorealism, but we can dream. Always following the natural curve of the carrot to keep that shape going. You can see how much these details really just help bring it even more to life. They add so much to the carrot, so do not sleep on tiny details. They are where it's at. Little dots I'll have even more concentrated, and then that paper towel is, remember, leaving the ghost of the paint I just put down. So it's not completely removing it because this paint is not wet enough. I'm just making the paint reactivated with the dampness of my brush. I'm not using a lot of water from the cup that I have near me. And so that paper towel will just lighten it up slightly to leave a little bit of like the detail there, but not a deep concentration that looks unnatural. And we'll just continue to build up those details to further enhance the realism of the carrot, little by little. Most of these imperfections are found in the reference photo. I know I can't stop saying it, but it really is like the lifeblood of your painting. So I am taking some creative liberties in spots where I feel like it maybe needs a little bit more, or I just want more imperfections, here or over here. But for the most part, I'm just copying what I see. And you can use a dry brush for a lot of those little textures. Your brush does not need to always be damp or wet in watercolors. So by just using the pigment that's left over on your brush and swiping it off on your paper towel and just placing it down will create very effortless texture for you. You'll see I'm going in with a little bit of green now added to this. So what I noticed in the reference photo was that both of the yellow carrots did have some slight green at the top, which led into those stems. So I just wanted to create a darker shade of that green that you can see in the foreground carrot for the background one. And that was made with using like a little sap green and some brown, like always. And then just adding in the detail on the little bit of the root that was still left, so we're not really making that dark or enhanced more so than it needs to be, and just making sure it looks cohesive and blended with the rest of the carrot. Now we're on to the purple carrot. So you'll see I am using a slightly smaller brush because this is a smaller area, but I wet the area and now I'm placing in my mix of purple, which I believe was a combination of neutral tint, some ultramarine violet. There would most likely be indigo in there, but it's not as purple as what your brain thinks of when you hear purple carrot. It has those elements, but for the wash, we're really keeping it almost kind of gray with like a whisper of purple. All of those purple tones that we want to build up will come in the second, third, fourth layers, but they're still going to be living in the mix of like neutral tint and ultramarine violet, probably some manganese violet. Yeah, we can see right there I was picking up manganese violet and the neutral tint to create this second layer. And it looks like Delft Blue as well, a very little bit of Delft Blue back to that manganese violet. And that's where I'm building up those darker shadows. So there's actually quite a bit of blue in there, but the neutral tint brings it back towards like the grayer family. So I'm just doing what I did with all the other carrots. I had the wash of paint, and now I'm adding the shadows to the sides with more concentrated mix, trying to leave the center open for highlights. Using the more concentrated blue mixture, so it has a little bit more blue in there, I'm placing that in those areas where the carrot is the darkest. And right now that's living up at the top near the stems. So I'm just buffing that out with a clean brush and just moving it around to the bottom. Already not worrying about that little line that's forming because that is going to play into one of those divots. Like with the other carrots, I'm now placing down some concentrated paint to start building up those shadows. And I'm just taking my damp, clean brush and buffing that into the rest of the carrot. I'm working side to side rather than as one carrot, just so I can really make sure I'm in control of the area that I want to work on. Because this carrot is so small and skinny compared to the other ones, I'm trying to be a lot more mindful about where I'm placing everything and how I'm scrubbing it out, because it can easily get too dark too quickly. And more so like the purple, I don't really know how much it's going to scrub away. So I don't want it to make it too dark at all and then just not have the option to scrub away for the highlight if I manage to cover it up on accident. So I'm just placing the next layer in just really small confined areas so I don't get ahead of myself or let it get out of control. So now I'm actually picking up some magenta to make the purple a little bit more vibrant. Before it was getting, I think, a little too cool toned. So the little bit of magenta is now helping us bring it more towards like the purple family, since it was living pretty gray. But I'm just concentrating that again on the edge of my carrot, and then I will buff it out with my clean, damp brush in that sweeping motion that looks reminiscent of the curves of the carrot. You'll just see I'm scooting it down towards the bottom. Different to my last carrots, I didn't really build up those shadows that heavily on my first layer because it is just so small. So a lot of the details and the curves and the three-dimensionality are going to come from these like the grooves and the lines and the little like scuff marks from this carrot, and it's just going to be a lot of layers and a lot of patience. Now it looks like I'm dipping into indigo and adding a very little amount to my more blue mixture to keep adding in those details. So I just wanted it to be a little bit more cool toned for this shadow area. So I'm just taking the residual paint and just scrubbing that into that area to start building up that layer, and then I'm leaving the ghost. I'm adding the paint and I leave the ghost. And right there again, I'm just using the side of my hand to make sure that everything that I've already worked on is dry so I can place my hand down to start this next layer. To be honest, I probably should have used like a piece of like tracing paper or anything, a tissue perhaps, to just really protect that area. But you know, once you're in the groove of things, you just kind of got to keep going. That's what I did. See, again, I want to put my hand there so at least it's dry, but I really should have protected it more. So I'm just brushing off the excess of the paint and not adding any more water. I don't want my paintbrush to be any more wet for this when I'm scrubbing them together. Whoa, jump. I apparently didn't film that. You can see I've really built up that area of shadow intensely. The purple carrot is going to be really close to, I don't know, like an eggplant color. Like it's dark. It is a dark carrot, but we still want to make sure we get those highlights, which is why I'm working very small and into very contained areas. So I can really make sure it's to that depth of color, but I don't want to get there too quickly. So just continuing to take concentrated amounts of paint, cleaning off my brush, either with water or just using the paper towel, and scrubbing it in to the rest of the carrot. Picking up more of my Ultramarine Violet, I'm bringing the tone of that color to be more purple, and I'm placing that right at the top, which connects to the stem, and just making sure that those shadows are dark, and just bouncing back and forth from my mixes to continue to create a color that is dynamic. And just blend, blend, blend. It's just blending all the time. You never stop blending. I blend in my dreams. Speaking of blending, who wants a margarita? I don't have a blender, so I don't think I'm going to get one of those anytime soon, but maybe one day. Ooh, it's Tuesday. Maybe Taco Tuesday. Anyway, I digress. We are still painting and we're still building up the curves of that carrot. The purple is a little bit more tedious. I think the yellow and the orange just really blended together. The colors were very clear to me with the yellow and the orange carrots. They're vibrant, and I think that's what's interesting with the purple is that they're a little bit more like subdued, and you really have to nail the color mix, because if you make it too purple, it'll look fake. And obviously that's not what we're trying to achieve here. So we're just being a little bit more fiddly with the purple carrots. And one thing I will recommend is I really love neutral tint. I also really love the color indigo. So if you are thinking about getting like 2 individual paint colors to maybe bring your mixes to the more realistic side of things, I'd say neutral tint and indigo. Those I add to a lot of things. Sepia brown is also a big one, but you can get brown anywhere. Neutral tint is really a dark horse in this purple carrot experience. Back in with the magenta and the manganese violet. I looked it up. It's not manganese-y, it's manganese. But so I mixed those two together to bring up that vibrance again. So while it is a little bit more dull of a color like the purple carrot, we still want there to be the vibrancy that we see. So it's just finding that balance. And in there, I'm getting tired of how light it is. So you can see I just immediately went in and added in a nice wash of color. So that'll help me now be able to more clearly define my shadows in the next layers. Back into the Delft Blue, I'm making that a little bit more cool toned of a color, and I'll be placing that down in the bottom of this carrot to just really further enhance those shadows. I'm always moving my brush back and forth following the curve of the carrot and just leaving a ghost of the color behind. I'd say that the purple carrot took the most layers. They're definitely like the thinnest and the most confined layers, but it took a lot of fiddling to get it to the level of color that we want. Here come those little scratchies to create those little curves and the more imperfections that we love. So we're just taking our drier brush and smudging that around, keeping with the more cool toned palette for this. So I'm just building these up and focusing on small segments of the carrot and just making sure that they are what I'm seeing in the reference photo, both in color and the weight of lines that I'm putting in. But now you can see that the carrot is starting to come a little bit more to life. It's not as quick as the other carrots and maybe not quite as interesting. It's just a lot of little brush strokes, small smudges, and small details to make it more realistic. I'm really painting a lot with the cool toned of the duo, so the right hand side of my palette, to build up those shadows. There will be moments where I'll pick up more of like the warm toned purple, but for the most part, shadows are cool toned, especially with the shade of this carrot. So that's why you'll notice I'm picking up a lot more of like that like Delft Blue, neutral tint, Ultramarine Violet mixture rather than the one with the Manganese Violet and Magenta. And unfortunately, I did not end up filming the other two carrots. So if you are going to attempt this painting, the other two carrots are done the exact same way. Here, boom, cut. So I apologize for that. So the center carrot of the three, you'll see has a nice little pocket of pink more towards the top. So that was that focus of the magenta. And if you look, and I've left it this way intentionally, that middle carrot of the purple looks like a witchy finger, like a little witch's pointer finger. In the reference photo, it had like more roots and stuff coming over the top, which I didn't add, which I think took away from the spookiness of it, but I kind of love it, so I left it as that. But now we're going in to the last purple carrot that we have in this little cluster, and it lives very far back. It's behind the orange and the yellow carrot. So we're starting it the same way with the wash of the cool toned blue, and then that purple right there that I'm reactivating and mixing in both of the ultramarine violet and manganese violet as well. And it looks like some Delft blue as well. And I'm just going to really go hard with my initial wash of color because I don't want to have to build layer to get it to the level of shadow that we can already see it is. So this one will be on the initial first wash a lot darker than my other ones. I'm just really placing in some deeply concentrated amounts of those colors that I've mixed. I'm now going in with a little bit smaller of a brush to really get into those finer details behind those carrots so it's all cohesive and lives as one. And right now the whole carrot is pretty damp, so I'll go in with my neutral tint to neutralize that a little bit. Some manganese violet, and was that Paynes Grey? That might have been Paynes Grey. And I'm just placing that in to really recede the carrot. While the carrot is lightly damp, I'm again, taking some darker colors and starting to build up on the edges. This one will have a more substantial highlight in the middle compared to its shadow counterpart. So I'll just be very mindful of that for this one and just slowly build that up. What's nice about how dark this color is I already know it's going to scrub away and be removed easily. To remove color like this, you want to make sure you're doing it when the paint is still wet. If it dries down completely, you won't be able to just pick it up with your damp, clean brush. You need to make sure that it's still wet. You can afterwards, if it does dry, go in with a clean brush and scrub it out and then take your paper towel to remove, but that's a different effect. So something to keep in mind. So I'm immediately continuing to build up that shadow work. It's really the most prominent feature of this carrot. While there are still those details that I like the divots and the little cracks and bumps and bruises and things, the shadow is really what's taking this thing home here. So I'm just building up that shadow as much as I can while that layer is still damp. Remember, I don't usually work wet on wet, but there are moments like this when I want it to be a seamless blend that wet on wet is pretty useful. And wet on wet doesn't have to mean like your paper's like soaking wet and your paint is soaking wet. My wet on wet sometimes is just damp on damp almost, but it's all the same. It's that verbiage is just that the paper is not dry. So you'll see the color, like all watercolors, dried down so much lighter than what we had initially placed. So again, now here I'm going in with my second layer after I know what I need to add to really bring that value darker. So I'm starting by placing it down in a really concentrated area and scrubbing it across in that rounded motion to connect it to the other side of the carrot. Making sure to stay very mindful of that central highlight, because the way that the light is hitting in this reference photo, there is a very clear highlight versus a very clear shadow, and I want to maintain that. So there you can see I picked up way too much of that neutral tint, so I placed it far away from my initial mix, and then can add in little bits of it as I see fit, and I just continue to build up that shadow. Now I'm taking that mix and I'm dragging it down the bottom half of that carrot to continue on that shadow that we're making. And I'll clean off my brush and scrub it out to the other side of the carrot. And again on the other side. And just building up where I see that it needs to be darker so it looks as receded as possible. So here I didn't feel like my highlight was popping enough, so I'm taking my clean brush and scrubbing exactly where I want the highlight to be, and I'll take a paper towel, lay it on that area, press down and pull up, and you can see it's much more vibrant now. And then I'll go in with a little bit of a wash to just kind of soften that edge. Now adding in some of those little curves to make it look more real. You can see somewhere along the way I lost that highlight yet again. So I'm doing a different technique where I'm taking just my clean brush because that paint was still wet. So I'm taking a clean brush and removing that paint again so I can again establish that highlight. Now I think this is where I'm gonna leave you. I don't think there's much more that I can explain about my process of these carrots. I think you got the idea. I didn't go into showing how I painted the stems and the leaves and like the rubber band or anything. This painting video would be, what, 4 hours long if I did that. So let me know if that's something you'd be interested in, and I can share that in another video. But for now, I really appreciate you guys being here and sticking around and watching this tutorial with me. And I can't wait to see you in the next one. Bye, guys.